Hello there, I'm Sanjeev Gupta. Welcome to Face to Face.
And I'm Lanre, Akinola. Sanjeev, delighted to be hosting this with you. Now, I've been dealing with this question of narrative for a long time, and I've heard what you're saying countless times. We need to tell more of our success stories. We need to tell more of our success stories. Yes, sure.
Not just tell, make people learn from it.
Yeah, exactly.
And replicate.
Yeah, exactly.
In scale.
What we need is a serious discussion.
With whom?
Amongst ourselves, first and foremost.
Are we planning to? I think we should.
Oh, you mean in terms of the show?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, look, this is going to be a core part of what we're doing, right? We're going to bring people onto this show. We're going to hear from the business leaders.
We need to.
Yeah.
And that's the idea.
Yeah.
We need to bring successful African leaders, whether in the community space, whether in the social space, whether in the business space, whether in the political space, to share what they did to achieve.
Yeah. And what they are doing. Right?
The cycle of defensiveness, insecurity, low self-esteem has to be reversed. And it can only be reversed, Lanre, by real stories. Yeah. Real people telling real stories.
All right, so Sanjeev, how does one go from being a banker to being a TV presenter?
It's a breeze, man. I don't know what you guys say. It's a difficult job. It's so easy that I thought even a banker could do it.
Right.
I was told there's more money in media.
Yeah, I don't know where you heard that. I mean, that's
in the media, of course.
That's some fake news for you right there. Yeah, there you go. Right, perfect.
Yeah, but on a more serious note, and thank you for reminding me that I was a banker and a funder and an investor for many years. And it's this 35 years of working on the African continent that gave me some perspective. Now, don't go about saying, it's not good for bankers to have perspectives. Bankers do have perspectives. And one of the kind of, let's call it profound realizations I came to was that, has anybody stopped and thought about this last 350 years of Africa's evolution? You start off with the period when slavery happened, and that essentially meant the best of Africa's youth disappeared from the continent. I don't think any economic study has been done on the loss that created. Then you had the period of what I call enslavement or colonization, as the more sort of fashionable word is, that systematically decimated Africa's systems, laws, heritage, culture. Then, of course, you have the post-colonization, the independence period.
Yeah, so-called independence, right?
Yeah, and remember, that was also, unfortunately, a time of the Cold War. So essentially, Africa got thrown into a proxy war period where you were told to take sides, right? And you suffered because of two great powers struggling. And then, of course, the Cold War ended, all hunky-dory stuff. Everybody seemed to be thinking there's a new dawn.
Yeah, globalization, all of that good stuff.
Washington Consensus.
The Washington Consensus.
No more, sounds profound, right?
No more conflict, no more tension. It's just one big happy family.
No
right?
tariffs.
Yeah.
No trade tariffs, right? And again, in many ways, there was no delivery. There were no investments worth speaking. There was a lot of talk, and the emergence of China. And now, which probably allows me to answer the question, you are in another very interesting period for Africa, because you're suddenly seeing great powers fighting, and you are like the proverbial ham in the sandwich now, and kind of not knowing. So the important thing to remember through this perspective that I've suddenly come up with is that there is three common strains that come out of it. One is this dependence that Africa has had, both mentally and financially. The other is the hypocrisy of the world. And the third is downright dishonesty. And that's the cycle that needs to be broken.
It's a good history lesson, a brief one. Where does that leave us in 2025?
There is a saying, and I think it's worth repeating, that those who don't read history are condemned to repeat it. And I think in many ways it is therefore critical, it's almost essential, that today's world, both inside of Africa and outside of Africa, appreciates this history, appreciates this long, 3 centuries long, of operating in a world where rules have been dictated to it, order has been imposed on it, and in many, many ways, like the proverbial Pied Piper of Hamelin, we have been misled. And if you do not get that context, if you do not make today's leaders, both globally and in Africa, understand, then change will not happen.
You said Africa is in an interesting moment earlier. I think that's an understatement, to be honest with you, because we're going through another cycle now. And one of the big frustrations, the big disappointments for Africa has been that we've had these cycles and we've missed them. We haven't seized opportunities. This is kind of a seminal moment. Something quite profound is happening.
If you take a step back and kind of hold that thought on the seminal moment a little bit, and kind of go back to the need of the hour, as I see it. The need of the hour today, and I talked about history, I talked about context, I talked about awareness, I talked about self-realization and all that stuff. It's somewhere, somehow, and if us, Lanre, you and I, can somehow create a dialogue which allows the world, and I mean the world that includes Africa, to see and understand Africa's own success stories. That would be a useful start.
Yeah.
Right? I would love to see management books coming out from Africa's leaders on how to operate in Africa. Because it's not hunky-dory stuff. It's not milk and honey.
No.
There are complexities. But the stories are not being told, Lanre. And if stories are not being told, you don't get that sense of pride, that sense of ownership.
We hear all about the problems, the negatives, nothing works, right? Yeah. Which is part of the problem. And part of what we need to address with what we're doing here, right, is the narrative on Africa has been written by people who, frankly, don't really understand the place, are not vested in the place.
Yeah, but we are our worst enemies too. You know, if you again look at sort of the recent history, you don't have to go back 300 years again. Think of Africa being ravaged by disease, ravaged by pestilence, ravaged by war, ravaged by legacies of colonization, ravaged by the world order's hypocritical rules, ravaged by other people's conflicts, right? Africa survived. The substance must be there for Africa. I mean, look at COVID. Well, how much help did we get during the COVID
none.
period?
It was quite the opposite.
So Africa operated, right?
It was quite the opposite.
Yeah. So these are the stories, and it's more than stories. These are actual facts that should give us the confidence to know that we can be the masters of our own destiny.
Yeah, look, me, I would just like to see a more grown-up and mature conversation about Africa, a bit more depth, a little bit more insight into really understanding it. Look, for me, there's no debating Africa's resilience. There's no debating Africa's potential, right? We all know that. I mean, that it's absolutely enormous. Yeah, Africa, what it could be, what it should be compared to where we are today. It's the gap is unfathomable.
As somebody said, Africa is rich. Let's make Africans rich.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Absolutely. You know, I think it was, and Kofi Annan, he famously he said, right, Africa is a rich continent with poor people.
It kind of allows me to come back to that point you made, and it's an interesting choice of words you use, seminal moment, right? And I think, for any region or any group of people anywhere in the world to make a change, it has to seize the time.
Yeah.
Right? As they say, nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. So I think what you were trying to say, if I may put words in your mouth, or maybe you can say it for yourself, is that given the current state of the world, it's a bit of more things change, more they remain the same, right? Conflicts have always been there, will always be there. Great powers fighting will always be there. Trade barriers will come and go. Protectionism will prevail. Yeah. So in many ways, it's not new, but it is a cycle which Africa has to take.
But look, I think you used the phrase an idea whose time has come. The idea I'd throw out there is called multipolarity, and I think we need to unpack this a little bit. And a good way to do that is we've got a few data points here that I think really capture what we're talking about. I don't think this is one that you can say, oh, things come and go, right? There's ups and downs in the global economy. This one is big. It's certainly, from an African standpoint, the biggest cycle in the last century. And I think you can make the argument this is the biggest realignment and rearrangement of world affairs in 500 years. Okay, so this is a very big one. And we've got a few statistics up here. They kind of speak for themselves. What you're looking at is share of global GDP in PPP terms, right? So it's not aggregate GDP. Okay. What you have on the left is the G7, the usual suspects. We all know who they are, the US and its allies in Europe. And on the right, you have BRICS, which may have started as an acronym coined by a former Goldman Sachs economist, but has since grown into one of arguably the most important grouping of nations out there when it comes to reshaping the global economy.
I never thought of it this way.
Yeah.
BRICS is actually, and that's 2023.
This is 2023.
Even before the enlarged.
Exactly, right? So this is before a round of enlargement by BRICS. And just, from 16.9% to 32% in 30 years or so. Now, this is before countries including the UAE joined, Iran has joined, Ethiopia has joined, Egypt has joined, Indonesia quietly joined early this year. A lot of people still don't fully sort of appreciate how significantly the global economy has already shifted. And this is just one data point. This is just GDP.
So what's your point here? You're saying that, therefore, Africa has choices.
Therefore, Africa has choices like it has never had before. Because this isn't just about China, India, Russia, Brazil, and South Africa. But although take note that South Africa is one of the core members of BRICS and has been for a long time. You now have 3 full members of BRICS being African. Ethiopia and Egypt are in there as well. Mm-hmm. You have partner countries like Nigeria. Nigeria is a partner country, right, with plans to become a full member. And, in many ways, it's kind of a no-brainer.
So there you have it, Lanre. Yeah. If I may paraphrase what you're trying to say, that if nothing else, history and everything else, this data shows you that we in Africa have to stop being defensive.
Yes.
Have to start thinking that there are ways and means of leading our own continent out of poverty.
This is the first time in the industrial era that we're talking about, and we all know the phrase now, even a few years ago, nobody was talking about this, that the global south is not only going to have a seat at the table, but is actually going to be making decisions about how the world is organized when it comes to economics, trade, investment.
Right. Enough said. A lot more to be said. But I think we need a break. So we'll be right back after the break.
Welcome back to Face. Sanjeev, where were we?
Let me share a little joke, my favorite, talking about BRICS, because, in global forums, particularly the erstwhile Western forums, including Davos, one keeps hearing criticisms and queries on what is this BRICS about, why BRICS is necessary, is BRICS a political movement? So one of the Western journalists, I think, asked the foreign minister of India that why was it necessary to form BRICS? And he gave a brilliant one-line answer. He said, because the G7 was not open for membership.
Yeah, well, there you go, right? There you go. He's being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but he's also making a fundamentally important observation, which is, if we're not allowed to join the club, we're talking 80 years since the end of World War II, and China and India are not part of the so-called G club. Then what are our options? Obviously, we're going to set up our own group.
If I may bring you to some of the realities that I dealt with in my time with AFC, because as you know, I worked in AFC for a few years, 9 years in fact. Before that, I worked for other institutions. I realized how much one can raise in terms of capital and funds from sources that are not that obvious, right?
Okay, go on.
We managed to raise funding from Turkey for Africa. We obviously managed to raise funding on bilateral terms, on financially commercial terms from China. not grants, not concessions. We managed to raise money from Korea, from Japan, commercial money.
But why wouldn't you?
The sort of argument is aid is good, grant is good, but private capital or commercial capital in whatever form, tough. But I didn't find it. I mean, okay, I don't want to suddenly say that it's been easy, but we found that if you can, and this is something that I think we need to bring out more, Lanre, is we found a very simple truth, is that like anywhere else in the world, if you can find funding within your own control, money that is yours, and you take the initial risk of developing and de-risking opportunities, because capital is like Goldilocks. It doesn't like anything too cold, doesn't like anything too hot. It just likes it perfect. And that perfect weather or environment has to be created by domestic capital. If you can use African money, which is available, to develop de-risk projects, you will find global.
Okay, you say African money is available.
Yeah.
So look, I don't have a background in banking. My background is in media, but in all the conversations I've had over the years, the recurring theme has been there is no money in Africa. Yeah.
So where did you hear that from your media friends?
Well, I heard it from people like you, from bankers, investors.
Not
speaking at conferences. I've heard it from all sorts of sources, from politicians, from the public sector, private sector.
I must have been telling you half truths.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, for me.
Yeah, let's put some context here. AFC recently did a study, and I think there have been similar studies elsewhere, where almost $3.5 to $4 trillion exists today, which you would define, anybody would define as African money, African capital. It's the reserves, it's the pension monies, it's the banking system's money, and people forget, African sovereign wealth funds money, right? But then, if you see the asset allocation, that's where the opportunity lies.
Well, I was just going to ask, where is that money hiding? Because I'm not seeing much evidence of it.
Money never hides, money finds a place, right? But because of the received wisdom, in some ways, that Africa is risky, but also because of political, policy, financial, regulatory challenges that African countries have had, the tendency, unfortunately, has been to hedge against domestic volatility by investing as far as possible outside. But that is a function of how you create an environment for investments to come back. And that's being done. Yeah, not to the level I would like it to, but it's being done.
I hope the irony of that isn't lost on people, right? Because we talk a lot about why...
Say what you want to say.
Well, we talk a lot about why foreign capital should be looking at Africa, yet at the same time, reserves on the continent are being invested outside of the continent, which is the worst possible message you can send, not only in terms of trying to raise capital externally, but what does it say about your belief in the continent?
At the end of the day, if you do not put your money where your mouth is, right, why would you expect somebody else to do so? Right. But, as institutions and as business people, we have to accept the reality. And the reality is that for all kinds of reasons, and let's not make it a blame game or a victim argument, but for all kinds of reasons, for a vast amount of African opportunities do not find capital, right? But because institutions are coming up, because banks are getting more sophisticated, because the regulatory regimes are getting much more organized, because of reforms in the pensions and the life industry, there is the emergence.
And let me add, and because the world is more diverse than it used to be in terms of sources of capital, right? That's also a factor here. You mentioned earlier, right? You raised money from Turkey, you raised money from Korea, raised money from Japan. Back to the conversation we had earlier, there are more countries to work with. The Gulf states are investing a lot in Africa.
Absolutely.
And importantly, I think a lot of those countries, they don't come with the baggage that, let's be honest about it, that you get when you're dealing particularly with the West, which is the number one offender when it comes to looking at Africa as just an absolute no-go area.
Yeah, but this is where soft power has to come in as well. Lanre, branding is important. African leaders, successful African leaders, and there are many, going back to the original point I made, needs to tell their stories a little less modestly, a little more with a visionary aspect to it, and make people feel comfortable that in spite of the complexity, there is a body of knowledge, a body of experience that can make capital work for you. Because it exists. It's not a joke. I mean, Dangote Industries exist. And Africa Finance Corporation operates, right? You have Ethiopian Airlines, that is a successful airline.
Yeah, and they
more successful than some of the Western airlines.
And they've just announced they're building a new airport in Addis, and that's going to be able to handle 100 million passengers a year.
So you don't have to look too far to realize that there are good success stories which needs replication.
Of course, absolutely.
So it goes back to brand building, goes back to soft power. It also goes back to how, and maybe, hopefully, Lanre, you and I can play a role here, going back to why face-to-face, is how do we help African leadership to articulate better what they have achieved, what they wish to achieve, and how they wish to achieve, and somehow create that diplomatic space for negotiations to happen. Who was it who said that if you're not on the table, you're probably on the menu?
On the menu.
Right?
I don't know. It sounds like something someone like Kissinger would say.
I think it was Kissinger.
I don't know.
But it's been repeated by a few people. And that's so true, that if we do not tell our story, if we do not create our own positionings, if we do not understand the seminal moment, the seminal moment is an obvious one, right? I mean, we touched on it, but think of it. Food security, energy security, especially renewable energy, access to critical minerals, new markets.
Yeah. Young markets, growing markets.
Security, combating the immigration challenge. All of this, the solution is in Africa to industrialize, in Africa to grow, and Africa to create jobs. So these things have to be said, Lanre, and the diplomatic space has to be created so that people somewhere, somehow must realize that it is not the nice thing to do to invest in Africa. It is not even the right thing to do. It is the smart thing to do.
Yeah. Look, I couldn't agree more. And it goes back to the point you made earlier, right, around taking ownership of this process. But what is our approach to this? What is Africa's strategy for this? We talk ad nauseum about China in Africa, Europe in Africa, Japan in Africa, etc., etc., etc. I can't.
What's our strategy?
I can't.
Everyone has a strategy.
Yeah, I can't remember.
We don't have one.
I can't remember, and I'm talking about high level here on the political side or the business side, ever hearing a conversation about, well, what do we want, and how do we make sure that we get it out of this?
Now, I think for us, with all the various things that is indeed happening, we have to strategize such that the world will be fearful of Africa, in the sense that if you do not engage, somebody else will.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to create. Let's do something about it. I think what we've got here is something very special. Here you are, you understand the narrative perspective, the bias perspective.
You understand the money?
A little bit. Understand the dynamics of investing. we can and will bring in leadership to talk for the world at large, but Africa in particular, to appreciate the good things that's happening.
So are you saying we need an Africa first?
Absolutely.
I totally agree. We need to get those voices on here.
I'm really glad that you and I could get this going.
Huge potential, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.